Hi, and welcome back to Perspectives. In this lecture, we'll discuss police officer discretion, as well as the factors that influence their discretion. As the slide suggests, officers wear so many hats in their role as a police officer. For this reason, officers yield a great deal of discretion in how they conduct themselves and how they go about doing their job. Officer discretion is a complex and critical aspect of law enforcement. Discretion allows officers to tailor their responses to the nuances of each situation. However, it is influenced by a range of factors, from personal beliefs and departmental policies to the characteristics of the suspect and the nature of the crime. Let's look at a few of the more significant factors that influence how officers use their discretion.
Officer discretion refers to the decision-making power that law enforcement officers have in determining how to handle a situation. This can include deciding whether to stop someone, issue a warning, make an arrest, or how to respond to a particular incident. Discretion allows officers to use their judgment to make decisions that are appropriate for the specific circumstances that they encounter, rather than just strictly following a set of rules or procedures. Because police officers have the power to deprive people of their liberty, and they must often make choices quickly and in ambiguous situations, understanding the factors that influence how they use their discretion is of critical significance. Discretion is influenced by a variety of factors, including personal, institutional, and situational considerations. An officer's background. An officer's background, including their education, training experience, personal beliefs, and cultural values, can significantly influence how they exercise their discretion. For example, an officer with extensive training in community policing may be more likely to use discretion to resolve conflicts with de-escalation rather than resorting to arrest. Similarly, an officer's personal biases or past experiences might affect how they perceive and respond to certain situations. Suspect characteristics. Characteristics such as suspect's age, race, gender, socioeconomic status, and demeanor can impact how an officer exercises their discretion. Studies have shown that officers may be more lenient or more punitive based on these characteristics, sometimes unconsciously. For instance, an officer might choose to issue a warning to a young first-time offender rather than making an arrest, believing that the individual deserves a second chance. Now, I can't stress how significant suspect's demeanor impacts an officer's discretion. Let me give you a funny example. When I was an undergrad, I had a sociology professor explain using a couple of scenarios. Let's say you're driving down the road and you roll through a stop sign. The next thing you know, you're being pulled over by a police officer. When the officer approaches, you apologize profusely for not coming to a complete stop. You are polite and responsive to the officer's request for your driver's license and your insurance card. It's likely that you'll probably get off with a warning because you were so polite and so very sorry for rolling through the stop sign. Now, let's say you're driving down the road and you roll through a stop sign. The next thing you know, you're being pulled over by a police officer. When the officer approaches, you roll down your window and you shout, "What do you want? Don't you have something better to do? Don't you have something better to do, pig?" Well, rest assured, you're going to get a ticket. Departmental policy. The policies and guidelines set forth by a law enforcement agency can either limit or expand discretion available to officers. For example, a department that prioritizes zero tolerance for certain crimes like domestic violence or drug offenses may require officers to make arrests in these cases, reducing their discretionary power. Conversely, a department that encourages community engagement might allow officers more leeway to handle situations informally. Community interest. The expectations and priorities of the communities in which an officer works can influence their use of discretion. In communities that strongly support strict law enforcement, officers may feel pressured to make arrests and issue citations more frequently. In contrast, in communities that prioritize rehabilitation and restorative justice, officers might use discretion to divert offenders to social services rather than the criminal justice system. Pressure from the victim. The desires and pressure from victims can play a significant role in an officer's decision-making process. For example, a victim who strongly insists on pressing charges may influence an officer to make an arrest even if the officer believes a warning or mediation would be more appropriate. Conversely, if a victim is reluctant to press charges, the officer may decide to resolve the situation informally. Disagreement with the law. An officer's personal belief about the fairness or appropriateness of certain laws can influence their discretion. If an officer disagrees with a particular law, they might be less likely to enforce it strictly. For example, an officer who believes that minor drug possession should not be criminalized might choose to issue a warning instead of making an arrest, even if the law allows for a more punitive response. Nature of the crime. The seriousness and type of crime being addressed significantly influences an officer's discretion. For minor offenses such as traffic violations or public disturbances, officers often have more leeway to issue warnings or citations rather than making an arrest. For more serious crimes such as violent offenses or those involving public safety, officers are more likely to follow strict procedures that leave less room for discretion. Lastly, relationship between the offender and victim. The nature of the relationship between the offender and the victim can influence an officer's decision-making. In cases of domestic disputes, for instance, the close relationship between the parties might lead an officer to attempt mediation or counseling referrals rather than making an arrest. Conversely, in a situation where there's a history of violence or a restraining order in place, the officer might feel compelled to take more formal action.
Okay, thanks so much for joining me. Please reach out to me if you have any questions.